Could you please state your full name to the camera, please?
Yeah, I'm Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Davison.
To start the interview off, I just wanted to ask, according to the Police Federation, 8 in 10 officers are suffering from mental health issues. Why do you think this is?
I think it's down to a number of reasons, really. I mean, firstly, the kind of everyday job of a police officer is really stressful. You deal with people at their worst moments of their lives, day in, day out, really. So the kind of range of incidents that police officers will go to will be from the relatively trivial all the way through to the kind of most horrendous scenes of death and carnage. Previous to being a police officer, for instance, I'd never seen a dead body. Within the first 6 months, I must have gone to 5 or 6 sudden deaths. Just being around dead bodies is a bit of a thing when you've come straight into a job, straight from university or wherever you've come to the job from. Then I think it's got a prolonged exposure to that kind of job. I think there's also a thing around a culture. So the police is a culture which is traditionally about being quite strong mentally and being quite tough and going to the next job. And actually what that means is people can often bottle things up, so they don't always talk through what they've been to. And by any measure, if you go to a job where the kind of most horrendous things which 2 people or more can do to each other have occurred, it leaves its effect on people. And without the capacity to be able to speak freely about what's gone on, it's perhaps unsurprising that police officers, much more than the general population, can suffer with their mental health. I also think they're probably busier than we used to be. Across England and Wales, there are fewer police officers now than there were 5 years ago. So there are more jobs, there are less police officers, and actually there's a large component of the work which is a lot more complex than it used to be. I've just done 20 years in the police service. When I first joined, very few people used the internet. There were no smartphones. Things like cybercrime and child sex exploitation online were really the kind of works of science fiction. Now they're part of a everyday police officer's job. So the work is actually becoming much more complex and much more technical than traditionally I think people see policing as. It's not walking about on the beat anymore. It's dealing with a whole range of issues.
You mentioned less police officers doing more jobs. Do you think this is one of the main causes of this?
I think it can be a contributing factor, but I think there'll always be a need for more police officers. There will always be work for police officers. So, in one sense, you could arguably never have enough. Actually, I think the main contributing factor is there's something around the kind of work hours. There's something around how isolating the job of a police officer can be, actually. If you can imagine if you're working rotating shifts, so you work earlies, days and nights, and work weekends, you work bank holidays, you work Christmases, you'll work your wife's or your partner's birthdays, you'll work your kids' birthdays. Actually, all of that can be quite socially isolating. But I think actually it's more about the nature of the work we do, how complex it is, how upsetting it is to deal with people who've been through the most horrendous crimes. And also this thing around culture of knowing when it's okay to put your hand up and say, I'm not coping very well, I'm not doing well. And it's only in recent years that the police service has started to sit up and take notice that that's something we need to do. Previously, in my view, it was much more of a case of just keep going until you can't go anymore, in which case then you've suffered quite a serious breakdown or mental ill health episode. Actually, the police service is now much more willing for people to say, I need a bit of time out, or I need to speak to somebody about how I'm feeling because I know it's not normal, or I'm depressed, I'm not coping well. It's the early intervention that I think we've really moved towards.
As you've mentioned with talking and speaking out, when obviously mental health can obviously be a serious topic, if they keep it within themselves, do you look for certain behaviour within their role, or?
Yeah, so the police service is one of those organisations with lots of different ranks. So you have lots of different kind of management checks. I think there's a number of things you can look out for. If you're a sergeant, so a person who's responsible for all the PCs, or even if you're a PC, you can look for your colleagues being withdrawn, or you can look for their kind of temper suddenly not being where it was before, or some of the behaviours changing. And actually, one of the key things we need people to be able to do is to have awkward conversations, because I think we're no different to any other workplace, insofar as you can say, how are you doing? And somebody will say, yeah, I'm fine. Actually, is the person fine? Because the follow-up to that might be, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm fine. I don't think you are fine. I don't think you are fine because... And actually, sometimes those kind of conversations are needed for the person to realise that they're not where they should be, or they're not well. They're difficult conversations to have, and they're probably doubly difficult in the police because, as I say, our general culture is that we are the strong ones for when the public need us. But actually, you can't protect the public if you're not looking after each other. If you're not at the top of your game when a member of the public needs you most, it could really affect both their lives and yours. So it's about having those very difficult conversations, and then the higher up the ranks you go, I think the more important it is to speak openly about your own experience and your own issues, because then you give permission to people to be able to speak out. I've been very vocal about it in force. I've had periods where I've not been well, and the reason I think why I wasn't well was because I'd adopted this I'm just going to soldier on mentality. And there comes a point at which you're forced to accept that actually I need to do something about how I'm feeling.
You've mentioned your negative states in terms of mental health. When did that occur? Did that occur recently, or?
Yeah, some years ago.
Some years
ago. So I was working on a particular team, and in short order, my job was to. I was a sergeant at the time, so it's quite a long time ago, and I was part of a specialist team that was on one particular case, and it was about some people who were essentially selling indecent images of children online. So my job at the time was to kind of get up when it was dark, drive to a secret location that wasn't a police station, sit in a kind of airless, windowless room and categorise indecent images of children for 7-8 hours a day, and then drive home in the dark. It was quite a secret job, so I couldn't really discuss it with people outside of my immediate team. I was a sergeant, so I was the leader in that team, and it came to a head where one particular day I drove home. My wife was bathing my two kids, who were both quite young at the time. They kind of noticed each other were naked, and they did something really innocuous, which is to point at each other and say that they were naked. But actually, I just spent months and months and months looking at really vile images of abuse of children, and I couldn't stand to see even my own kids in any state of undress for 6 months, and I knew it was a very abnormal way of thinking, but actually at the time I hadn't spoken about how I was feeling. I didn't really realise that it had such an effect on me, and it was only really some years later, because of something else, that I decided to address it. Exposure to really unpleasant things can leave its mark, And actually, the courageous thing to do is to stick your hand up and say, I'm not coping with this well. And it's a story I've shared internally in the force. I'm at a fairly high rank in the police now. I'm in a really senior position, and I think it's important for people like me to stick their hand up and say there have been times when I've not been well, and it doesn't have to be career limiting if you admit it. The right thing to do is to seek some help and to get yourself back on the track of being well again.
How important is it for the productivity of the police force that you come forward and speak out? And obviously, likewise, other people doing the same as what you've done.
Yeah, so kind of for productivity, I think it's absolutely vital. It's like anything. I often give this analogy, which I've stolen shamelessly from somebody else, that actually there are signs that are much like an engine warning light. So if you're driving a car and your engine warning light comes on, you can keep driving it for another 10,000, 20,000 miles, probably. But the squeaks will get louder, the bangs will get louder, and sooner or later the engine seizes. And then rather than just topping up with oil, as you should have done at the beginning, now you've got to replace the whole engine, and your car's out of commission for months and months and months. Actually, there are signs that you can tell with other people and yourself that you're not doing well. And I'd rather that people stuck their hand up there and metaphorically got their oil changed than waited until their engine seized up, because early interventions always got to be more effective than the kind of treatment that people need when they're probably very ill.
You mentioned public in an earlier question.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, obviously the main concept is mental health in the force, but have you noticed an increase in responses from the public?
Yes, yeah. So the police, over my service, so 20 years, we definitely respond to more calls from members of the public relating to their own or others' mental ill health. So in some reports, it's estimated that anywhere between a fifth and a quarter of police time is dealing with issues of mental ill health. We know that we have certain powers under the Mental Health Act to detain people if they pose a threat to themselves or the members of the public. Frankly, neither I nor my officers really want to have to deal with mental ill health episodes. I honestly don't think that the use of police power should be anything other than a very last resort. And given that 1 in 4 people at any one time will have some kind of mental ill health, I think the kind of notions that we're trying to adopt, which is kind of talking about issues, talking out when you notice something different with your friends or your relatives, it applies to the public just as much as the police, because frankly, the police officers are just human beings. We're just human beings who choose to put on a uniform and try and protect people. But when we drive home to our families, we're exactly the same as everybody else. We have families, we have feelings, we have emotions, and members of the public. The police are the public are the police. That's what Robert Peel said, and that's where we are. The only thing that's different about the police is the nature of the work we do. We're not superhuman, and nor are the public.
Finally, to conclude, where do you think the main causes of concern in terms of mental health in the long run?
Yeah, I think the kind of main areas of concern I would think about in the long run, firstly, I would love there to be slightly more community services, I think, for members of the public. The police get involved with mental ill health really when people have reached the point of crisis. So with the notion of early intervention, I really wish there were slightly more and slightly better community services to keep people well, rather than treating people when they're unwell. And likewise with the police, I think the main area of concern is that the work that police officers do, a lot of it isn't known to the public. I know a lot of the public watch kind of TV reality cop shows where it's kind kind of people driving around in cars and scuffling with people on the street, but that's only one part of what we do. So I think my main area of concern is that the police need to learn to look after each other and be very careful about what kind of culture we want, because the old cultures of keep going, keep being strong, as we deal with ever more complex crime, ever more harmful crime, if we keep that kind of culture going, it'll only break more people. And I don't want to see broken cops. I want to see well cops who can look after the public.